Hey Reddit, what's the strangest coincidence you've ever personally experienced? My old work ran a Secret Santa once the week before Christmas. It was a $10 limit and the person I was buying for I didn't know very well. I left my buying to the last minute because I just didn't know what to get her. So I was in town and walking past some shops when lo and behold, I see an old copy of Oliver Twist in the window of the second-hand bookstore. It just called to me, so I went in and picked it up. I checked the first page for the cost, and guess what? $10, perfect. So come the day of the Secret Santa, we were all opening our gifts, some 150 people. Out of the corner of my eye I see some people crowding around a woman who is crying. I keep listening and people are calling out for the person who was her Santa. I go over and reveal that it was me. The lady I had bought for was crying and hugged me. She said 10 years ago her house burned down along with all her possessions. The book that I bought her was her favorite and also the exact same edition, so had the exact same cover she remembered. Because it was a second-hand book it was even weathered in the same places she remembered, so it was as if I grabbed the book off her shelf before the fire and delivered it to her 10 years later. This should somehow be blown up into a movie. Here in my little town in northwest England, there's a good kebab shop from which the lads and I have ordered for years. We've been in there after countless nights out and had them delivered to our doors, so we know the guys who work there pretty well. They're mostly Turkish. Once a few of us got together for a short break in Turkey. Having got off the plane, we waited in the car park outside for another pal who'd been on a different flight. As we stood, soaking in the ambience of a new country, none other than the tall guy from our local kebab shop walked across the road right in front of us, 2,000 miles from home. That was weird. He was an undercover Turkish agent who was also good at kebabbing. Nah, wasn't even him, dude's just super racist. So did he deliver the kebabs you ordered? Seeing Paul McCartney, the Beatles, on TV in 2001, and noticing he was tall. Next day I'm walking down a very quiet street, and walking towards me is a really tall guy, and it was Paul McCartney. He must have seen my expression so he veered my way, stuck his hand out and said, "Hi mate." I was shocked. 18 years later I'm still shocked lol edit. I'm 6 feet 1, turns out he's 5'11". Maybe he was just lanky. He certainly appeared tall to me. I should also add that he didn't just stick his hand out, I meant to say he shook my hand. Crazy. He then briskly walked away. A very brief encounter but a really important one for me. I also wouldn't blame anyone for not believing me. It's a weird story. Apparently he's quite friendly like that. One of my dad's bus driver colleagues said a car pulled up beside him at traffic lights with McCartney in the passenger seat. It was summer, windows were open and Paul just leaned out the window, casually said hello and asked what's it like being a bus driver. The guy claims to have replied, "It's a long and winding road, Paul." I used to get 2 buses home from work. I got off the first one having left my phone and keys on the front seat of the bus without realizing. Got on the second bus, went to my favorite front seat, and my possessions that I didn't know were missing were waiting for me. The bus had changed driver and route. Still freaks my nut out to this day. Phone, wallet, keys. Before you leave the bus, remember the acronym WOWY. Wallet, phone, W keys, egg backup. You reminded me of a coincidence a Redditor cited another time this question was asked. They were at home, about to cook an egg, when there was a knock at the door. It was their neighbor, asking if they could spare an egg for a recipe they were making. The Redditor handed over the egg which they had thoughtlessly carried in their hand when they went to answer the door. The neighbor confusedly accepted it, giving them a quizzical look as they left. I want to read that if you find it. This is the funniest thing in this thread. The neighbor must have been so confused. I love this story. Nobody believes me when I tell this story, but one day my husband and I ran into the same couple at 3 different places, in 2 different states. So my husband and I had an errand to run out of state. We leave early and stop to get breakfast. The couple was sitting across from us. The lady had on a funky shirt which is why she stuck out in my mind. After breakfast we drive the next state over to the office we have an appointment at. We're waiting in the lobby and the couple from the breakfast joint walks in. Weird. So we spend the day finishing up our errands, and then we drive back home. I didn't feel like cooking so we stopped to get some dinner at the pub. We sit down at the table and guess who's already eating at the table behind us? The same friggin' couple. My partner and I ran into this Japanese mother and son traveling through Southeast Asia. We ran into them in Siem Reap at the Angkor Wat temples, then again in town that night. We left 2 days later to fly to Ho Chi Minh City, and they were on the same flight. We politely nodded and smiled. We landed in HCMC and went our separate ways. We went to our hotel, they went to theirs. After dinner on the second night we decided to go to a rooftop bar for a drink. We walked in and they were there. We all laughed and waved. Up to this point we hadn't actually spoken to each other. But we decided to sit down and chat to them for a short while. We didn't actually discuss the rest of our travel plans beyond our departure dates from Vietnam. A few days later we are leaving our hotel to go back to the airport. A shuttle bus picks us up, and the Japanese mother and son are on the bus. Turns out the 2 hotels shared a shuttle service to the airport. We didn't know where they were flying to, but turns out they were also flying to Nha Trang, and were seated in the row opposite us. We get to Nha Trang and decided to share a taxi into the city. We were staying at the same hotel. By this point it was beyond ridiculous that our paths were crossing this much. So we just accepted it. And decided to hang out with them that night. Have dinner. And go out for drinks. We get to chatting about our lives. I grew up in a small rural town in Australia. About 18 years earlier we had a Japanese exchange student live with us for about 3 months. Turns out this Japanese exchange student was the brother of the woman sitting across from us. It was mind-blowing. After all the weird path crossing we had already encountered over the last 10 days, this was just a cherry on top. I went back to the hotel that night and sent my mom a Facebook message to send me a photo of the Japanese exchange student. She dug through our old family photos and found one of him, and I was 10 or 11 at the time. The next night we had dinner with them again and I showed the mother the photo. She started laughing because it was her brother and she thought I had been making a joke the night before. Crazy times. I was in St. Augustine on vacation. On the way there I just happened to think about this girl I knew back in college in Orlando. Just sorta wondered what she was up to and the like. Sure as shit I ran into her in a bar there the first night. She was there celebrating graduating from PA school. Similar thing happened to me. I dated this guy Steven when I was in my late 20s and we lived together for a year and then we broke up. And I was devastated. It had been about 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years since I'd seen him when I was walking in Santa Monica with my best friend and I said to her, you know what's weird? Steven have so many friends in common and I have never seen him in this whole time since we broke up. 5 minutes after that we walked across the street and walked into a restaurant and who is sitting there but Steven. The other night I was making a coffee lost in thought and thinking about a friend I haven't heard from for ages. Go back and there's a message on my phone from him. Edit. This is because I am a legitimate wizard, change my view. Me and a friend took some acid one night and were tripping hard. Decided to walk to a gas station and get some smokes or something. We walked by a car lot in the small town I'm from and all of the cars in the lot were cop cars. We were both walking ramrod straight all the way to the store, very quietly bought whatever we went there for and took a back street back to his place. We just stared at each other for like an hour and didn't speak after we got there. Turns out the city had bought a whole new fleet of cop cars and they had all been delivered there and were on the lot for just that night. Too funny. Reminds me of a time in my rebellious youth, 20 plus years ago, when friends and I found ourselves in a similar state to what you mentioned. Around 7 a.m. as the sun is rising we are feeling good and decide that a friendly game of frisbee down the street at the park would be a good time. We stroll down to the park and the light is so beautiful and the air feels so good. We get in a good throwing zone of 5 of us and we are heating it up with the frisbee and hooting and hollering as we were the only people there until we weren't. All of a sudden there were about 40 police officers in full SWAT gear that showed up. Turns out they had a planned SWAT exercise at the park. We just so happened to be buzzing our faces off it while throwing the frisbee. Once it registered we split quick. Was sitting in a restaurant about 200 miles from where I live telling my mother, who was visiting from a different country, about a trip I had to another country about 6,000 miles away with a work colleague, and the lady at the table next to us leans over and says, I think you're talking about my son. Turns out I was sitting next to my colleague's parents while showing my mom pictures of our trip. I was in Paris and some Americans were lost. They were the grandparents on edit of my high school classmates from Nebraska. It's a small world. Ooh la la. Ha, typing with one hand. Oops. In grade 10 English class, the teacher didn't have anything planned for us to do, and it was close to the end of the year I guess, so she goes to the big cupboard in the corner and pulls out a stack of copies. It's examples of a successful essay written during a final exam, so we can learn what a good one looks like and how to build a narrative, etc. The topic of these was what was the most pivotal moment of your life? There's 3 examples, ranging in proficiency. We read through the first 2, and I volunteered to read the last one aloud. I start reading and I stop. The essay was about me. My big sister had gotten a really good mark 6 years earlier on her final exam essay which she wrote about the day I was born. I got pretty emotional about that one. I liked the idea that you just get all emotional and stuff while reading and everyone thought that it was like the best story ever. Like wow, we need to do something like that, but that's awesome. When I was born my mother told me my brother slapped me when he first saw me. That always gave me the edge on he started it, so when he refers to something like a week ago, I can be like yeah well, when I was first born you hit me. Worked half day. Drove 6 hours from Southern California to Northern California for car camping with my wife. Chose obscure campground which was neatly deserted, off-season. Picked the most deserted and remote campsite location. We planned on rocking the tent. We're bummed after setting camp and another couple select site right next to us. Turns out to be a co-worker I'd spoken with earlier that day. Edit. I hadn't told co-worker anything about plans. We weren't close. Earlier that day we spoke briefly of work-related issue. How annoying. Something similar happened to me except I didn't know them. They could have pitched anywhere in a huge field, but they chose right next to our tent. Isn't there some sort of extension of the urinal code that extends to campsites? If not, there should be. There definitely is, but people who don't camp often don't seem to be aware of the rule. My wife and I were in Tucson visiting my mother who just moved there. My wife decided she wanted tamale. We drove around for 2 hours stopping in restaurants looking for tamales. Couldn't find one. Went back to my mother's apartment. Literally 2 minutes later somebody knocked on the door of my mother's apartment asking us if anyone wanted to buy any tamales. Next time you're in town try Tucson Tamale Company. They're excellent, have multiple locations, and you can buy frozen packs of 2 each. I'll do it. So the best random tamales used to come from the woman at the Bookman's parking lot on Grant. Now that location had to close for road widening, she is at Fry's on Grant and First or the Bookman's on Speedway most of the time. Sometimes she goes to one spot and her husband goes to the other. That's your Tucson pro tip for the week. Not me, but a pretty interesting story in my family. 2 of my great-grandfathers got imprisoned in the same jail and served time together. My great-grandfather on my mother's side was an architect and even drew my other great-grandfather's house. Did their children know each other at the time, or were they just 2 dudes in prison? Just 2 dudes in prison. My parents got together over 30 years after this. I think they found out this when my grandparents met each other. This is also kind of like a dark spot on both families' history, and my grandparents don't like to talk about it. My sister, Emily, was on a ski lift in New Mexico when some younger girl across from her asked if her name was Emily. Apparently the stranger, who kind of looked similar but underage, had found her lost ID the year prior and had been using it for a year to buy alcohol. Edit. After this blew up, I texted my sister, who reminds me it was weirder. She was later hiking with friends for 17 hours, they got tired, thumbed for a hitchhike, and got picked up by this girl's twin. That's the best story right here. Imagine her going through emotions as she recognizes that the girl in front of her is who she has been pretending to be for a year. Did she just admit it right away? Well, yes, she had to explain how she recognized her. Told this story elsewhere, but I'm making you all read it again. Was at a convention. There were only a few people in the room. My friend and I wanted an autograph from a voice actor. He started singing in his character voice. There were two random guys next to me. One pulled out a video camera to record it. Years later, my husband and I are talking with friends, and the convention comes up. The guy with the video camera was my husband. I also took a picture later that day of the crowds, and he is in that picture. I stood next to my husband years before I met him. Edit. Thank you to everyone who shared their stories. Amazing how our lives can intersect. And a big thank you to the Redditor who gifted silver. It's a major award. This is one of the things I always wonder about. The people I know now, how many times did I bump into somehow in the past? If there is an afterlife, I hope I get access to such a database. Back in the early mid-90s the phone system changed, and you no longer needed to dial the area code for a long-distance in-state call. We're a small state with only one area code. One morning I woke up to the phone ringing, and when I picked up I recognized the voice on the other end as belonging to my old boss from a few years ago. She had an unmistakable voice. We had a nice conversation for a bit before she realized she had dialed the wrong number. I lived in a different town in a different part of the state, but the number must have been off by only one digit from the one she'd tried to call. To add to the coincidence, I had overslept and would have been late for work if she hadn't called me and woken me up. We are sitting here trying to guess what state is small enough for one area code. Rhode Island? New Hampshire? Delaware? Is it by population? Because Wyoming and Montana don't have a large population help. Started dating this girl a few weeks ago. We get to talking about where we live, etc. She lives in not only the same building, but exact same apartment I lived in 2 years ago. It was so fucking bizarre walking into my old apartment that I never thought I would see again. What are the odds? Oh man, my now husband and I had the same deal. We, roommate and I, were the tenants that moved into his apartment right after him. We even came to look at it while he was still living there but not home. I had no idea I was looking at the furniture of someone I'd eventually marry. The first we hung out he came over and told me. I couldn't believe it. That is pretty weird. When I was 18, I lived in a town a very long ways away from where I ended up moving. I struck up a friendship with this guy from work in that town. We play Halo, watch movies, etc., and he was awesome. I ended up moving suddenly due to a family emergency and never got his contact information. I didn't even remember his name a decade later, but I thought of him often as he was an awesome guy through all the years. 11 years later, I'm working at my job, carpooling with someone from my training class, and one night he asks if I mind his roommate being in the car as he was going to take the car after we got off at work and use it for the night. He introduces us, I turn around, and in the backseat is the guy from the town a very long ways away. We reconnected immediately and now live together. He's my best friend for sure and the godfather to my children. Have you remembered his name yet? Still calling him old pal while hoping he hears someone else say it. When I was a kid, around 13, I played a lot of a video game called Diablo 2. I started a clan with a few people I'd met on the internet and we played every day. At some point we were helping some random person and he asked to join. We thought he was nice enough so we let him in. As part of this clan we had a shared account we used to store game items for each other. After about a month of playing this new guy goes in and changed the password, steals the account and defriends everyone. Completely disappears off the map with all of our stuff. Fast forward a year later and my family moves to Texas and it's my first day at school. I'm sitting in algebra class talking to the person in the seat next to me and he mentions he plays Diablo. I said me too and that I ran a clan and everything. I asked his username and it was him. 2,000 miles away from where I first virtually met this guy, he's sitting next to me in math class. When I told him mine, his face went into total shock and he didn't know how to respond. It was awkward for sure. Ended up telling him I didn't care and was over it, but let's just say we didn't end up becoming friends. Probably thought you had tracked him down to exact your revenge. My screen name is Inigo Montoya. You stole my stuff in Diablo. Prepare to die. My husband has a similar-ish experience. He lived in Germany from age 5 to 13 and he played online games. He had a specific group that he played with, but only one of them was an actual friend he hung out with in Germany. Everyone else was just online friends. Right before freshman year, he moved to Colorado. He ended up going to the same high school as his online friends. And those guys he was online friends with turned out to be my friends in my group. It was really crazy when they were exchanging gamer tags and realized that they had already been playing together for years. My 70-year-old MIL played some Farmville-like game on FB, and she had a friend that was also in her 70s, and they chatted and sent each other items in the game. She had health issues, and the friend had some too, and they were both liberals, so they loved talking about those things together. My MIL lives in the Midwest, and her friend lives in Southern California, and the friend invited her to visit, and she bought a ticket to spend a week with her. All of us were very much against the idea. My FIL went with her, and the friend did turn out to be a sweet 70-year-old lady, as advertised, and my MIL did spend a week with her. Her family was also shocked about the whole thing. My FIL actually felt it was safe enough to leave her there while he went to Vegas for a week, then came back to pick her up. They're best friends and visit each other every year. When I was a kid while hiking with my dad, I was babbling and said, "The teacher told us if you speak too much a fly will get in your mouth." In the exact moment a fly flew into my mouth. I was riding my bicycle very fast and ran through a group of mosquitoes. One went into my nose, which caused me to open my mouth, which resulted in a lot going into it. I crashed sneezing and coughing on the ground trying to get them out. Bystanders thought I was having a seizure or something and tried to help while my friends stood there laughing. You got some great friends, lol. I'm not too sure what to do if my friend is swarmed by mosquitoes. I could either laugh or slap their face a lot in an attempt to weaken the swarm. Had recently moved cities and had a new local phone number. Had to make a lot of calls to various utilities, etc. to get everything all set up. I call one of them, I'm speaking with the customer service rep, all is going fine until she asks for my phone number. When I tell her, she starts freaking out on me. Who are you? How did you find me? How do you know that phone number? Kind of stuff. Eventually managed to get her calmed down to the point where we could figure out what was going on. Turned out she had been in an abusive relationship where her ex had stalked and harassed her, including him and his friends, making threatening calls constantly. Eventually she had moved to a different part of the city and taken a new, unlisted phone number. My new phone number was her old one, and the moment I said it, she assumed he had tracked her down once again, and the harassment campaign was about to begin anew. I'm not sure she truly believed me when I explained it all, but we eventually got through the phone call. This happened to my mom about 10 years ago. When she was about 13 years old, she lived on Midway Island with my grandparents because my grandpa was an officer in the Navy. She had a water skiing accident where she basically slammed her face into the seawall because she didn't let go of the rope in time and had a scar on her forehead that she covered with her bangs. Anyway, fast forward 45 years and she is working at a retirement facility, and her job is to coordinate outings for residents. There was a new resident and she was talking to him about his life, trying to get to know him. He said he was in the Navy, and my mom thought that was cool since her dad was too. He said he was stationed at Midway Island, which my mom thought was super cool since it's a tiny island, and he said he was there during the same time she was, the 60s. He went on to say he hated it because the only interesting thing that ever happened was when an officer's daughter didn't let go early enough while water skiing and slammed right into the sea wall and cracked her head open, and he had to save her. My mom was totally shocked, pulled her bangs to the side to show him the scar and said, "I was that officer's daughter." Coolest coincidence ever. This should be at the top because it's an amazing story. This should be the top story.
Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Tell me what you dislike or love about this video, so please comment below and hit the bell icon so you're notified anytime a new video is released. This is a WeCrow Media production.